Welcome to the Grim Native, where we talk native horror. I am joined today by my first ever victim, Shane
Mm.
Fogg. And
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on. My name is Shane Hawk. I'm enrolled Cheyenne Arapaho and of Potawatomi and Hidatsa descent. I came into horror in 2020 with a little collection called Anoka. People seem to like it. It helped boost my career from being just a substitute teacher. So now I'm an actual teacher and a writer. So I teach high school history. I'm also editing a big anthology with my friend Ted Van Alst. Theodore C. Van Alst Jr. for his writer name. It's called Never Whistle at Night. And that all came to fruition pretty quickly after I entered the horror scene, the writing scene, to be honest. I don't know, it exploded and it's coming out this September. So really excited.
I've been really excited to see this explosion of Indigenous horror, which with Anoka, that was really good.
I
And
appreciate that. Thank
I
you.
was really surprised learning that was your first endeavor into horror. I want to ask, when did you get into horror?
I think I'll share my actual first memory that I can come together. I think I was 4 years old. Across the street from my grandma's house, it's funny, my first memory ever that I can recollect is Halloween. And we went across the street of my grandma's neighbor, and the man of the house, he had a creepy pig mask, and he was like making pig noises. And that's just still, I was like I think I was in my mother's arms and just doing trick or treating. And he opened the door and it was doing pig noises. That's my first memory ever. After that, nothing else until I was like my fifth birthday. The first love of horror might be, I would say, the Goosebump books. As a product of the 90s, I just got hooked on those. And I think I've just always been a weird kid. Like, normal stuff is boring, but if there's any, like, supernatural or any stuff that's just outlandish, I connected with. Because I also grew up with X-Files and Simpsons and just cartoons that are just out there and probably wouldn't happen in real life. And then aside from Goosebumps, I would say it felt like a horror movie when I was little, especially when E.T. turned all white, scared me. Jaws, I saw that at an early age. That shark, I'm still terrified of sharks, even though it's not really a possibility of me getting got by one. Aside from this cruise I went on across the Atlantic, it terrified me in a cosmic horror way, just going out on the deck and just staring out into just water. It terrified me. And beyond that, probably watching, I think the first one I saw was Friday the 13th with my dad. I think I was 10 years old. And yeah, just something about it. It's just spooky, and then you get to cover your eyes, and just from there, just I loved because it was taboo. Don't tell mom I'm showing you this, and then you can't really talk about it at school with weapons and stuff and the violence. And then just from there, I just fell in love with it. After that, I think I watched The Thing for the first time, then The Blob. So movies really spoke to me. I don't know, because you can escape. It's like Stephen Graham Jones says, it's you can experience horrors within this like safe playground. You know that you're going to survive, but you can see behind other people's eyes and experience something else. Even though regular life is horrific in itself, like it's like I don't know, for new terms, like a safe space for experiencing crazy things. And then knowing that you can close that book, you can turn off the TV, whatever it may be, walk out of the theater with your popcorn bucket. I was terrified of Chucky, actually. I forgot to bring that up because we always had dolls and toys in our big closet, my brother and I. And it was just the creepiest idea that one of them could come alive and try to stab me or whatever else. And I never fully watched it until I was an adult, but I was terrified until, I don't know, probably late teens, just because of that childhood memory of, I think I flipped the channels and Chucky was on, and I was like, "Oh my god, it's a live doll." But now you just laugh at it because you can just kick Chucky, punt him across a football field.
I have this thing with dogs.
Yeah.
So my family has a history of haunted dogs. And Chucky is one of the most terrifying things to me because of the stories that we have in our family of
Mm.
haunted dogs. When I saw Chucky for the first time, it was
Yeah.
almost like a trauma response, and let me tell you, the I used to have this recurring nightmare. I was probably about 3 or 4, and my cousin was 1 or 2, but we used to live in this old farmhouse, a little outside of Mountain View, Gotebo, towards Rainy Mountain. And there was a house that we lived out there when I was younger, and it was haunted. They would always say they would see cars pulling in through the driveway, but they'd go outside and there'd be nobody there. My
Mm,
grandma would stay home quite a bit, and she would hear footsteps upstairs when there was nobody there, and
mm,
just all creepy things that happened at this house. And I
yeah.
had this recurring nightmare where me and my cousin were playing, and there was a clown doll that had one of those strings where you pull it and it says little phrases. And I would have this nightmare where it would start talking to us and saying things that it wasn't supposed to say, and
Mm.
us getting scared and throwing it in this little closet. And I've always been scared of clowns, but I chalked it up to seeing it when I was younger. And
Okay.
so I always thought that was, like, the basis of it until I started having this dream. I brought it up one time, and my cousin looked at me and "I've had that same dream." And I was like,
Ooh,
"What?" And "Yeah,
shared dream.
I've had that same dream, like, for years, and he's terrified of clowns." And I
Mm.
was like, "Okay, that's trippy."
Yeah.
And I was going through some of my photos, like, putting them up on Facebook and everything, and I noticed in one of my pictures, that same clown doll is sitting right behind me. I was like, "We really had that doll." Not it's not a creepy dream, and I showed my cousin, that's it. He's like, down to the detail. That's
Oh,
the doll that I was dreaming about. And we have a lot of these, like, doll stories.
really?
Yeah.
I think possession stories are one of the creepiest for my personal horrors. And the story I wrote for Never Whistle at Night is actually a possession story. I took a story that my dad shared with me about his dad, my grandpa, going hunting, and I morphed it into a possession story that still creeps me out because I don't know, all those exorcists and anytime like a ghost possess your body, like I just can't imagine how it would be. Because a lot of the in movies, you don't really get that first person perspective. You get like the creepy exterior of the demon or the ghost and the external stimuli of who the victims are outside. But you don't get that first person, like, how does it feel having your body taken over? You have no control and you're killing these people and you're just trapped in there. So yeah, I wrote a story about that and hopefully people like it. But yeah, it creeps me out. Possession. Oh,
Yeah,
just gets to me.
yeah, now that I'm older, I can't watch possession movies without somebody there with me. And I feel so ridiculous about it. There's something about not having control that is absolutely terrifying, but thinking of something actually taking control and where are you? Like, what
Yeah,
are you actually experiencing or seeing? And it's such a terrifying thing to think about. Tell us a little more about, like, Never Whistle at Night.
I think it was early December. A reviewer named Bear put out a tweet that said, can't remember the verbatim tweet, but it was like, when are we going to get an Indigenous horror anthology or something like that? And my friend Ted saw it first and he tweeted me. He like replied to me, tagged me in it. And my friend Ted, my co-editor of Never Whistle at Night, he had been trying to do this for years. So he already had a system in place in his head. Then I caught COVID. I got the original strain of COVID. I was on oxygen machines, hallucinating, insomnia, sciatica, all that kind of fun stuff. And I just started having dreams about this anthology and how it would look on the shelf. I even had the cover art in my head. And then I started becoming, oh, what if I did it? And I was the editor. And then I started talking to Ted because he has so many connections. He knows a lot more people than I do. So we started texting, DMing, and then we're like, okay, let's try to do this. Kickstarter, self publish, we can do this. And then I started, as unprofessional as it is looking back in hindsight, started DMing like major native writers. I think Tommy Orange was the first one because he's also Cheyenne Arapaho. So I hit him up in January. I was like, hey, your birthday's coming up. What if I sent you a copy of Anoka for your birthday just for free if you give me your address? He was like, yeah, bro, that sounds good. And then somehow I slipped it in there. I have this idea. Let me know what you think of like a spooky anthology of all native writers. I was like, would you be down to write something like that? I know you're literary. You don't really do this kind of stuff. And he was like, yes. Immediately, he was like, I've been itching for something like this. So he was the first person that I just kept going from there. Just, I think after catching COVID and being on oxygen machines for 2 weeks, I don't know, I had this epiphany. I was always introverted. I still am, but I'm trying not to be so much. Not a risk taker, quiet, reserved, just doing my own business. But since then, I just felt like you could die at any moment. And I just had this fuck it attitude. Like, why not just pursue the things that I want and try to make things happen? And after that positive message from Tommy Orange, I just kept DMing people, whether it was Twitter or Instagram or whatever. And I don't think I got a no. Everyone said yes. And it just kept going. Then one of the last people I asked was Sheree Demeline, but she's the only one I had a contact through an agent. And so I emailed the agent, and then basically she was like, yeah, Sheree is really down for this, but do you have representation? And that was a moment of a huge pivot because we were like, we're going to be a Kickstarter or no, we're going to have an agent now. And we had a phone call, and now she's my agent, Rachel Latofsky of Cook McDermott. And it just blew up from there. Then she was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to write a proposal. We're going to sell it. We're going to shop it out to Big Five. We're going to try to get this book out there. And me and Ted were like, what? What do we, how's this going to work? And so I wrote an 8-page proposal. I think they call it a short proposal or something like that. And we had all these phone calls with all these interested parties. I guess I won't name them. But the one that we ended up with was Vintage Books of Penguin Random House. 3 different imprints of Penguin Random House came together, and they're like, yeah, we want this book out in the world. We will back you 100%. Apparently, it's never been done before. 2 imprints in Canada and 1 here. And it was a big, major deal. I don't think it's ever happened before for an anthology, a native anthology. And so we're just super grateful. And it was just like a snowball effect. Just because I had this fuck it attitude, just kept contacting people, networking, just trying to be real with them. And then it went from like a Kickstarter idea to Big Five took it on. And we wanted like half of the book to be invited established authors that are native, and then half to be up and coming, emerging people that want a writing career that haven't really taken off yet or they're not big names yet. And so we did this open call that same year, ending November. I think we ran it from when we launched it, so like late July to November 1st. So we're trying to give people a good window to get a story together. And we got like just over 100 submissions. We went through them, submissions from all over the world. And it was just a process. Like Bear, who did the original tweet, we brought him on to do slush pile reading along with David Tremblay. And we just went through the whole list. And it was an interesting process because Pagan Random House, because of some laws, they can't be involved in the open call whatsoever. So it's Ted and I not knowing what we're doing, just trying our best to do every single process part of it, even including just recently paying the open call writers. Just this month, we have to delve out all the payments ourselves, and that's crazy paperwork. But yeah, it was amazing. Even going back to those phone calls with the big 5 publishers, one of them was like, yeah, anthologies, they don't really sell if you have a lot of open call writers. So how about we limit it from 7 that you're pitching down to maybe 1 or 2? And Ted and I were like, no. So we said no to that. Luckily, with what was cool about Vintage and Anna Kaufman over there, our editor, on the business call, she was like, 7, why not 8 or 9 or more? And that really got our interest. Like, they were interested in more voices out there, lifting up people that want some more exposure. And we were really down with that. So our original vision was like 7 to make it maybe not half and half, maybe 2/3 and 1/3. And then now we're through copy edits. So we're super excited. Plus the forward by Stephen Graham Jones. I think when it all originally kicked off, I think he was one of the first ones we asked to, and he's like, "I'm really busy. We understand. He's putting out so much stuff. How about a reprint?" And it's a really good story to reprint, but also really that would take a slot away from someone else and rather have all original. That's what we're trying to push. And then he's like, "How about the forward? I think that's the best way I can help this project." So I was like, "Yeah, that sounds good." And once we got the forward from him, I think I shed a tear because it was like one of the coolest things to read. Once you open that book and you see that forward, I don't know, it feels like historical, monumental. I don't know. Maybe it's speaking like in grandeur, but it's a really good forward. And so we've come all this way. There's going to be 27 original stories, 14 from invited slash co-op editors, and then 13 from open callers. Super excited. We're going to push this thing like everywhere. We're also going to shop it out for TV and film and try to make this into a native horror TV show. So, yeah, that's what we're working on. It'll be out Tuesday, September 19th this year.
I'm super excited 'cause
Yeah.
you're right, like, it hasn't been done before, and, like, we have these smaller, like, indie anthologies that have been put out, but
Hmm.
actually, we haven't had actual horror anthology. We
Yeah.
have, like, the graphic novels but nothing that has the support of any of the Big 5,
Yeah.
and that in itself is absolutely incredible, and the fact that they were wanting to bring emerging voices in,
Hmm.
is even better.
I know. We're super excited, super grateful. Never thought it would happen. But like I said, that fuck it attitude, I think, helped get this ball rolling. It's been a crazy process. I have a billion files on my computer and all these emails, but I'm glad that it's coming out and we're just super stoked on it.
Yeah, I will say this, like, COVID has been so terrible, but yeah, like, I totally understand, like, your attitude about it because my mom passed away from COVID,
I'm
and
sorry. Yeah,
it was
I read about that.
it was a long process because she was maybe a day before her quarantine period ended, and, like, she had survived the virus, like, she was on that last day when she got COVID pneumonia, and it hit her really quickly, but after she passed
Mm,
away, I was just like, "Life's too short, like, this virus is really showing us we don't have as much time as we think we do," and I think there's so many natives who are in this position, they stepped out of that comfort zone, and but pays off, like, and it's such a wonderful
yeah,
thing because it's like bringing more hope into this dark place that we're in, and there's so many natives who are doing such cool things right now. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to do, like, the Grim Native, because like, when I founded A Tribe Called Geek, it was because I knew so many, like, comic book artists and people who are contributing to STEM and just not really
mm,
getting a place to have those accomplishments, like, celebrated or
mm,
anybody to know about it. That's established now, like, we got our Indigenous geek
yeah,
culture, and it's on the forefront, and it's growing, and there's so many more artists involved now, and so now it's, "Okay, where else?" Like horror, and plus horror is just, like, my passion.
yeah.
Halloween shirt, I have probably about 20 more.
I love it. Yeah, you gotta love John Carpenter.
Yeah, and my thing with Halloween too is everybody laughs at my fascination with this, because if once you get me talking about Halloween, like, I relate it to, like, the generational trauma that we experience as natives, because
Mm,
I see that in this whole franchise, and I think that's one of the reasons it resonates because colonialism is our boogeyman. And the trauma of that impacts us so differently. And then even with the newer trilogy that they brought up where they forgot everything that happened with the sequels after the second,
yeah,
but it focused on, okay, how did that trauma change Lori as a person? And she
mm,
was paranoid, she was preparing for it. And that's like us as natives, like where a lot of us are still in that
yeah,
position where we're preparing for the worst still, like we know it's not over. And where sometimes it takes us to bad places, and I wouldn't say, like, bad, but it takes us to where we're a darker version of ourselves than what we would have been without it, and
yeah, definitely.
and just and also not just us as individuals, but, like, our communities as well, and people laugh because I go off on this whole tangent when talking about the new Halloween trilogy because,
Mhm.
it's had mixed reviews. I'm
Yeah,
over here and I'm like, Yeah, my whole thing, like, I saw the 2018 Halloween. I knew Halloween Kills was coming and Halloween Ends, and then, of course, COVID happened and it got pushed back. And
Mhm.
being immunocompromised, like, I have thread from the beginning of the pandemic where I'm like, "Okay, if I don't survive to see Halloween Kills, somebody better riot and destroy this film so nobody else can see it." And then, of course, I got to see that, then it's like, "Alright, if I don't make it to see Halloween Ends, you guys better riot." And then, of course, I got to see them all, and after Halloween Kills, I was like, "Alright, I could die." Like, just it was so bad. But after
Yeah,
Halloween Ends and going back, I was like, "Oh, I see what they were doing." It didn't,
mhm,
but I see what they were trying to show about how trauma can impact a community.
right.
And then Halloween brings it back to how it impacts the individual, but also the next generation coming up behind us. And I was like, "Oh, like, this is pretty genius how they wrap this up."
Okay. I haven't
It
seen
didn't.
Ends yet,
Oh, yeah.
but Kills, oh, after that one, I was like, I don't know. Yeah, speaking of future generations, as a high school teacher, it's tough to see it reflected in the kids. It's been 3 years basically. We just had that 3rd anniversary of COVID closing down
Mhm,
schools, and it's just tough as a teacher. Behavior-wise, yeah, kids are a little crazy these days. I would say more so than when I was in school, like, I was a class clown and stuff. But I think it's just all these effects reverberating after all this screen time and being on Zoom for school, for education, and it's crazy seeing I teach 10th graders, and a lot of them are at the 6th grade, 7th grade level for reading, writing. It's tough, but I also understand, man, if I was their age and I was going through all this, like, literally the news is insane. I
mhm,
dealt as a 6th grader with 9/11 and the war on terror and, like, how everything changed after that, but I think this thing impacted the globe even more, and why would you want to behave in class or do your homework or your classwork when there's, like, just this existential crisis of all these COVID, and because I'm a history teacher, I have to talk about current events as well. I try to keep them informed, but also not fearmonger. It's really tough to not scare them or make them worried because this stuff is real. I just want to inform you guys. And that's what I've been doing. At least 2023 is off to a crazy start with China and Russia being cool with each other now and forming alliances. And now World War III is on the brink. Banks are collapsing. The CDC is now worried about this new fungus that's spreading like crazy,
mhm.
apparently, Candida auris. I talked about that with them, and we're like using dark humor. Oh, it's going to be like The Last of Us. But I don't know. I could just see it in the kids. I totally understand where they're coming from. And as a teacher, yeah, it's hard to manage 35 kids at a time with they all have different skill levels, behavioral issues, parents overworked, not reading to them at home, or doing any kind of thing with language, and it's just tough. I don't know. As a teacher, I like see it all, and I see the kids being pulled out. I see we're still doing COVID tracing where they're just pulled out for I think 5 days, and then they got to make that up. And then once you get COVID, it spreads, and it's like, how do you have motivation to even do it when you are there versus
Mhm.
when you get COVID, you're pulled out, and you got to be at home, and then you got to make up 5 days worth of 6 classes, and then get caught up with the current work. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that, but I just see it reflected in all the teenagers that I teach.
Yeah,
Tough.
hard because even as adults, like, we're struggling with it. So,
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, like, being a teenager and having to go through this because
Yeah.
I think that's why so many people too are turning to horror because there's so
Yeah.
much real life horror that's going on that you kinda
Mhm.
need a cathartic escape. Because I've
Yeah.
seen people who aren't into horror actually throughout the pandemic.
Embrace it, yeah.
Yeah, like, they're like, "I've been reading Stephen King," or, "I've been getting into these movies," and you're like, "What?" You're like, "You're watching scary movies," and they're like, "Yeah, I don't know what it is," but I think it's that cathartic relief of what you're feeling, like horror, anger. Because like, for me, Jason could kill, I can't. So for me, it's like living a little bit vicariously through Jason, not the victim. Uh,
Yeah.
getting that aggression out in a way I can.
Yeah,
But
I understand that too.
it's funny, like, you see youth and they're still into goth. You see our native kids, they wear the hoodies of the summer and they always
Yeah.
pulled over, like, you see them, like, with this high
That used to be me, yeah.
hands in the sleeves, and it's funny to see that because you understand in a lot of ways it's like a layer of protection still.
Yeah,
Even the music that we listen to, like, a lot of people natives are into metal and into, like, punk and things like that, and it is like it's like dealing with that aggression in a healthy way too, because I don't think any of us were ever taught to deal with our feelings of anger or just I don't know, I would say just anger because we have a lot to be angry about. A lot of us
mhm,
grew up poor. A lot of us grew up in families that were still dealing with the impact of colonization, whether it was the boarding school, whether it was
mhm,
alcoholism, drug abuse, things like this. These are things that we deal with in our communities, suicide, and nobody really taught us how to process those feelings towards it. It's nobody like, we're just now being able to be like, "Okay, we can talk about this. It's okay to talk about it and to
mhm.
acknowledge that this happened." Because, like, growing up for me, it was always like, "You don't talk about this." Like, I dealt with depression, and I
Yeah, me
had
too.
a couple of suicide attempts when I was a teenager, and the aftermath of that was behave, don't talk about it. People are gonna think you're crazy, you're not gonna get a job, you're not gonna get into a good school. It's gonna look bad on the family. Don't do this, don't do that.
Mhm.
Nobody really taught you how to process what you're going through. And then you realize as I got older, I realized it wasn't because they were ashamed of me or they didn't love me or anything like that. They didn't know how to deal with it because nobody taught them to deal with it. So they couldn't
Yeah,
tell me how to deal with it. And then
yeah,
you realize that later and you're like, "Oh." And then you let go of some of that anger too, because there's so much resentment, I think, that builds up too when we're not able to express ourselves or we feel like
oh,
somebody
yeah.
telling us, like, not to be ourselves.
Mm,
And I think through music, through film, through art, literature, I think a lot of our native youth use those as outlets to deal with that. And music, the big one,
oh,
because
yeah,
we're all into heavy metal. And
yeah.
act name a native who doesn't have all black clothes or went through a stage of where it was all black all the time.
Yeah, it's like most of my closet right now is black shirts.
Me too, like, it's just been in the last maybe 4 years where I'm like, "I could do with a little color." You know? It's like where my clothes aren't all black. Like,
Yeah.
my partner laughed because one of my favorite colors right now is orange, and he's
Mm.
"But it's so loud." You can't escape it, and I'm like, "But that's what I like about it," because I think as native too, we've been so invisible that I
Mhm.
think we internalize that, and we like to when we wear all black, when we're wearing the hoodies, like, we're trying to make ourselves even more invisible
Mm,
or to it's almost like a
I could see that.
physically embodying what we feel, like, we feel invisible, so we're gonna look invisible. We do that in different ways. So I think it's a interesting conversation, like, with our youth. Because also, it's okay to be a jock, like, it's okay to be a nerd or a scholar,
Mm,
but it's still not okay if you're into all these other subcultures. Like, if you're into heavy metal or if you're into
yeah.
cyberpunk or anything like that, it's not
Mhm,
acceptable. It's not seen as being something that's native.
mm,
I think that's another reason that so many native kids, like, gravitate towards that because it is if you feel like you don't belong, then it's like you're gonna embrace something that makes you feel like you do, but also that still feels taboo, like you're doing something you shouldn't. And I see that with a lot of our youth too. You embrace what seems a little taboo or seems a little bit dark or it's like you're on the fringe anyway, so why not just dive into it?
they're all just smaller subcultures, and you just gotta find your people. It's tough. It can be tough.
Yeah.
But I'll say though, as a high school teacher where everyone else is listening to classic rock and the typical stuff that's on the radio, my classroom's filled with my music. And I let the kids make playlists for their classes. and I get to hear all the contemporary stuff. They're into stuff that's different. And I only have a couple native kids in my classes, and they're cool like me. They're into metal, they're into punk. I think just for some reason, I think we're naturally anarchistic in a way. We want to raise our fist. We want to destroy institutions that have held us down. I rarely get to share anywhere that I'm pretty much an anarchist politically because I don't really see a lot of good in what's going on. But then people get scared of that word because they just see chaos. But there's different forms that you can take words. You can make community based anarchy. But yeah, in the classroom, it's fun to see this generation actually embrace my music. I would, before I got this position as a teacher, I just assumed that if I put like a song of mine on, they'd be like, "Ugh, what is this, Mr. Hawk?" I put like a cool song on and I look around and I see a couple kids, it's cool and embracing it. But yeah, I don't know. I think, like I was saying, I think natives naturally are, I don't know, against the systems that we had to be living under, forced under. And we express that in activism, in our own music choices, especially certain bands. You can get into the lyrics that are really pushing the envelope, punk, or even getting into rap like Snotty Nose Rez Kids. Yeah, there's just like a lot of music that we can explore that once you find your people that like the same music, it's cool because you get to be like, oh, check out this track, check out this one. And that's what I've been doing all my life. Emo was never really a phase for me. I still wear black shirts. I still listen to similar bands that I listened to back then. I still listen to the same ones. And like I said, on Friday, I just went to an emo punk show and it was just as much fun as going when I was 15, 16, 17. I used to play in metalcore and punk bands myself, guitar and stuff. So I don't know. I think it goes hand in hand, like being really into metalcore, punk, emo, and then being into horror. I think it just goes together.
It does. And I think it's because it's that expression of, like you said, we're a little bit anarchistic. It's just we don't really have many avenues to express that. So when we find
Hmm.
them where it's okay to be who we are, like whether we're angry or we're sad or wherever, it's like finding those spaces where it's okay to just be us and to be expressive in a
Hmm.
way that makes sense for us, but also like where it's actually embraced as something that's being like cool or accepted, which is usually right. Horror, if you're into like heavy metal,
Yeah.
you're cool if you're just in that space, like, you belong there. It's like the you got the black clothing, you got the uniform. It's easier to blend in and to belong
Yeah.
in those spaces than it is in a lot of our communities a lot of times, because there we stand out like a sore thumb, and that's not always a good thing. And,
Yeah.
because, like, we like to say we're accepting, but we haven't really been able to accept that being Native is such a diverse data beat. Like, there's no
Oh
one
yeah.
way to be Native, but yet we still try to fit it into these as much as we say we don't want it to we wanna break down these stereotypes, we still see them in many ways, the ideal traditional Native or the acceptable Native, it
Yeah.
don't really think about it, but we do, and I think finding, like, through horror, through, like, heavy metal, through music, all these other subcultures, it's a way for us to be a little more accepted. Because, like, for me, when I was growing up, it was Star Wars.
Yeah.
The Star Wars community is where I found, like, acceptance, like, I could be like, I felt like it was the one place where it was, like, it was okay to be me. And even now, like, you wear a Star Wars T-shirt, and if somebody else likes that T-shirt, it's like, "Alright, you got a buddy. You have somebody to talk to." And with
Yeah.
natives, Star Wars is another thing that natives are into. Our track is it's like you keep it on a down low a little bit because people to know you're too much of a nerd. When you really start talking to people, you're like, "Oh." When I started a Tribe Called Geek, it was because I was finding so many other natives who were into, like, Harry Potter or into, like, Star Trek, Star Wars, who were into, like, Doctor Who, and Battlestar Galactica and,
Yeah.
how that inspired, like, their art that they're doing now or their books that they're writing, and yeah, like, we got all these fandoms and we're part of those fandoms, and it's like, why not acknowledge that we contribute to this pop culture fandom or to pop culture in general? We contribute in many ways. We're a part of it.
Mhm.
It becomes a part of our identity, like, as Native people, especially with baby Grogu from Mandalorian. We
Yeah.
saw what happened with that. Like, he's indigenous. That's just fantasy.
Yeah, I just got a sticker of native Grogu at the recent powwow over here. I love it.
Like, natives are in such a cool place right now where
I know.
have this pop cultural dominance and,
Yeah, it's so
but
cool.
still, it's funny because, like, when we talk to each other and stuff, you're like, "No, I'm nobody important," but at the same time, you are somebody because all these people read your book, they know your work, and, like, it's important to them, and sometimes it's hard
Mhm,
to realize, "Oh, like, my work actually has meaning to somebody outside of myself." And it's also
mm.
surreal to think about that as well because it's just, who am I? Like, I'm just a nerd. I'm just a dork.
Yeah, the kids definitely feed my ego. I'm trying to be this humble nobody teacher, and they're always like, "I saw you on IG and someone put you in their story." They're always asking me about Hollywood and turning this book into a TV show. They're always hyping me up, and I'm trying to just be like, "I'm not that cool. I'm just teaching you history." But they hype me up all the time, so I appreciate that, and I don't know, it's a cool feeling sometimes, but it's also overwhelming. That kind of imposter syndrome always seeps in, whether it's you writing or you're doing art or something. You never know. You always think that you're your own worst critic. No one's gonna like this. I'm not good. Why do I want to share this with people? They're just gonna rip it apart. There's more talented people out there. I'm just taking up space. So I still deal with that right now. But that's like why I wanted this anthology out there. It's like the big writers can get even bigger, and then the smaller writers get some space. And really, all is just a big opportunity to get more voices out there. And I hope it just keeps going. Ted and I keep pushing, trying not to annoy Penguin Random House, but we're like, how about volume two, volume three,
Yeah,
to get more out
well,
there?
yeah, because you know what? It just you at saying that just reminded me there actually isn't a long running serial anthology for Native,
Yeah.
or actually any Native anthology that is like a long running series, but have all these other like horror anthologies where they're like on volume 25 now. But
Yeah.
it
That's it.
would be so cool to have that for like Native writers, like the best of Native for 2021, 22, 23, and
That'd be cool too. Yeah. Yeah. We were trying to envision maybe a trilogy. That's what we talked about in all our meetings, was like at the end of this, if it does happen, like a box set, like the old VHS tapes of horror movies. Never Whistle at Night Part 2, Part 3. That's our vision. We hope that it happens. Yeah, we'll see. Penguin Random House does have first look rights. So whenever Ted and I want to discuss another project, they get to look at it first legally because we signed a contract. So that's good. We'll try
that's
to
really good.
draft up volume 2.
So I guess we'll wind this up because we've been talking for a while. I really want to ask, what are your inspirations when you're going into creating a story? What kind of like music or what kind of mood or what kind of things do you find like inspiration in?
It's all random. Like there's a horror story that's coming out later this year, I think June or July, called Skin Maps. And I started writing that after I read Murder on the Red River by Marcia R. Rendon. And it has to do with near future dystopian America. And really, it's if you pull back, the big picture idea is basically I was scared about the ICWA getting looked at by SCOTUS again. So it's a mixture of looking at that if it gets repealed, a mixture of natives being adopted out by whites and being used as farm hands, being disconnected from your nations, your people, your families. And after I read that book and then read the author's note from Marcy, I knew of the issue. I knew of the act. I knew of what people went through, but then it was just like a little quick reminder, okay, people really went through this. And so I was inspired to write this story as like horror, kind of dystopian sci-fi that explores all that. So it can come from anything from an author's note to news article headlines to just anything really, to be honest. Shower thoughts. I'm a super random person. I can get really weird. My students know this. Like on Friday, the kids were working independently, and I just went on Google because I didn't have anything to do, and I googled creepy funny pics, and so Momo was on there. If you know of that character that creeps all the kids out, I printed it out, and then I put it on like a Google Doc, and at the bottom said "Sincerely, Shane Hawk" or Mr. Hawk, and then I put it into an actual envelope, and I would place them on random kids' tables, and then they'd open it and be like, "Ah!" And just my mind is all over the place all the time. Like, even when I was, I think, 17, I wrote a punk song called "Scatterbrained." That's how my brain has always been, all over the place. So I can dream up a world in 5 seconds, just weird stuff. And so I haven't really had chance to really delve into the weirdness yet, but my debut novel that I haven't really worked on that much because of teaching is gonna be a mixture of weird and body horror and just funky stuff all through a native lens. But I can pull in inspiration from just about anything. Even say a quote someone says to me, and it'll just get lodged in the back of my brain. I start thinking about it. Okay, what if this happened? What if this happened? And you asked about music. While I write, I do listen to music. A lot of times, songs that I've heard so many times that they're just like background. If it's a new song or a newish and I don't know the lyrics by heart or anything, it's too distracting. So I listen to a lot of, like I was saying, emo, punk, metalcore, post-hardcore from my teenage years, and it's just on a loop. It gets me into a certain mindset. It's like fun to me. So I'm just like at the typewriter, not the typewriter, what the fuck? The keyboard, and I'm just jamming. And I'm just like, I write in different scenes. So I think some people call them tentpole ideas. So it's like, what's a really dope scene that you want in your story? And then it's like I don't know, the big muscle. And then you have to work in the tendons to connect it all. And so that's how I write. I'm just jamming all the time. A lot of people write with music scores or like horror movie soundtracks. I can't do that for some reason. I don't know why. I have to listen to my own music, stuff I'm super familiar with, because then I feel like if I do listen to certain soundtracks, say if I listen to Friday the 13th, I'll probably just delve into Jason fan fiction and start writing like a slasher. When really, if I'm just listening to stuff that I like, mostly those genres that I said, that really helps me get along. I can't really do silence because my brain is so loud, but like hardcore music all the time with my AirPods. A lot of times I write at night, so my wife is sleeping, so I can't be like jamming out loud. But yeah, just everything like TV shows, movies, any little scene, some weird person I'll see at the gas station. Just all these little bits from my life go into my stories. Like in Anoka, pretty much all the characters are or lines are like actual things that I've heard in real life. And I got to get better at dialogue because a lot of reviews are bashing me for it. But to be honest, all the dialogue that's in Anoka is like stuff I've heard in real life, or it's like the way I talk to my dad. It's just the cadence, the way I cut off the pronouns. I don't know, it's just how I naturally talk. But yeah, long-winded answer, but I draw inspiration from a lot of things, and it's all random. My brain's on fire all the time, and I just try to tamper it out with some cool music that I like, and just shower thoughts, random kind of what if scenarios. What if this happened? This plain situation. but there's a knife in the room? Or what if an alien's in the bushes? Just insert random things. Also, early in the podcast, I mentioned my Never Whistle story. It's totally inspired by a story within my family. So it's an actual real life situation that my dad and grandpa were in. And so I pulled that into something of my own because I wasn't there. So I had to dream it all up. I was also asking him for all these details for early 1970s Utah up in Ute territory and what he experienced as a little kid. And with that story, I hope everyone digs it. But it gets into indigenous horror, like some really freaky shit. Then also, because we're so used to trauma porn and just the negative, the dark all the time, kind of like Steven puts jokes and sarcasm in, I put indigenous joy and love in there. So, like, moments between my dad and his dad are as real as possible. And I think that's just as important to put into your fiction is not always the negative, the dark, the spooky, the creepy, but put some jokes in there, some lighthearted stuff, maybe some romance or just stuff that kind of makes us human, makes us not just this like sorry song that everyone thinks we are. Because we have love, we have joy, we have excitement, we have jokes, jokes on jokes, we have everything. So yeah, I would say that's where I get my inspiration from. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that's good though. And also like what you were saying about dialogue is really hard
Yeah,
because we all have, especially as natives, like different accents, different ways of talking, different words. In my tribe, you hear the word "buh" all the
yeah,
time.
but
Anytime something's like annoying or corny, you're like "buh." Just
yeah,
or if you're joking around, one of the other things you hear in my tribe is "a China," which I have no idea where that came from, but something that like
China,
growing
huh?
up, we'd all be like, "Hey, China." And we're joking around and
Really?
but it's funny because, like, when natives do dialogue, you hear how they actually speak, and it can come off, like, a little jarring if you're not
Mhm.
familiar with that way of speaking or how we talk to each other. It's
Yeah,
not there's not one correct way or one way that is
yeah,
right or wrong, but there's a way that we talk with each other, and sometimes it's almost like we're talking in code because
mm,
you can't really say what you wanna say, you have to find a way around it in a way.
yeah, that's
Not straightforward. It's any like generational trauma, like residential boarding schools, all these things that we've gone through has changed the way that we communicate with each other. So it's never
that too.
straightforward. So I think because it's really hard, like even writing just from a journalist perspective, it's hard when you're trying to capture the dialogue or the real meaning of what's being said. There's always a subtext beneath it.
Yeah.
Almost a way of either being rude or being polite without being rude or polite, you know?
Yeah,
And it's hard, and then plus, sometimes you're just like, how I would react or how I would say something is not the way that a normal person is gonna say or react to something else,
yeah,
and it's figuring out, like, how do you do that and it still work within your story? Like, how do you find that flow? Because I
yeah,
think dialogue is the one thing that I struggle with in my writing too.
mm,
Like, I'm always thinking like, "Would I say that? Would this
yeah.
person say that?" Or
It's extra tough because with dialogue, it's tricky. It's like readers, we're all readers too, us writers, but it has to be realistic enough, but then also you have to cull it to fit the narrative.
yeah.
So it's realistic and then also not realistic at the same time. And you have to find that thin line. Because if you go to I don't know, if you go to Denny's and you're listening to someone talk with someone else, that's boring. The way that if you actually took real life and put it into a narrative, no one wants to read that. All the ums, the so, blah, blah, blah. And then you have to make it flip it on itself and have the dialogue deliver exposition. And so it's a weird thin line that you have to perfect. I'm still a nascent writer. It's been almost 3 years, but I'm still emerging, I feel like. But yeah, it's a funny thing to tackle dialogue. I don't know.
Yeah, because even when I just watch movies and stuff, I'm always thinking, "God, this is corny dialogue," but
Yeah.
people will love it, and you're like, "Why?" If a
Unrealistic.
teenager really talked like this, they'd be like a Pulitzer winner.
Yeah.
Not but, it's funny because, like you said, normal conversations aren't oftentimes that interesting, and so it's hard to try and make something that is mundane, like, trying to elevate it to a level that's
Mhm.
entertaining or that but it's still realistic.
Yeah.
I think is the other thing for natives too, because if we really did just write our dialogue, Tommy Orange, the way that he wrote the dialogue in There, I thought felt very real to how natives talk to each other, how we communicate. And I see that in so many other books too. It's a very natural, and I'm sure like non-native readers are reading it. They're just like, huh? Because it's a very ordinary but unordinary way of talking. And
Yeah.
because it there's so much that goes into what we say that we don't realize as Native people, and a lot of it is funny. Natives are just naturally funny, just like, we communicate different. We have a
Mhm.
different love language, and oftentimes to anybody else, they would see it as bullying, but for us,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah, poking and prodding is just out of love.
been really great talking to you, and
Yeah, you
thank you
too.
so much for being my first victim for Native Grimm.
Yeah,
Can you tell everybody, like, where they can find you online?
sure. So Twitter has always been my favorite, but not really anymore, as everyone knows. I don't know, since Elon's takeover. But I'm on Twitter. It's my name at Shane Hawk with an extra K at the end. Other than that, I'm on the other ones too. You could just go to shanehawk.com. I sell my books on there. I make t-shirts, blah, blah, blah. But you can also find all my other platforms on there too. So yeah, shanehawk.com. And yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm super excited. I tweeted out not too long ago that somebody asked, "What do you think the future of horror is?" And
Yeah, I
the
saw
answer
that.
is like, "The future of horror is Indigenous." Like,
Yeah.
not even a question. Like, we're bringing
Hell
it
yeah.
here, people.
Hell yeah. Of course we are.
It was really great talking to you, and I look forward to reading all of this great stuff coming out. Like, Never Whistle at Night, I'm super excited about because I think it's gonna be huge. And I
We
think
hope so.
it opens so many more doors, and I'm excited to see what's behind those doors.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're hoping for. We want more natives to write.
Yep, the more voices we have, the better, especially with horror. Like, we need to
Mhm.
we've made people cry, we've made people laugh, now we gotta make them scream.